Board of Supervisors is hereby called to order. Val Humble present. Karen Myers.
Karen Myers present.
Mary Helen Kincaid. Leslie Sawyer.
Leslie Sawyer present.
And Kathy Kellen.
Cap.
Yeah, I see you're muted, but I see you're here.
Yep.
Mary Helen not here yet, right?
Correct.
Okay. The meeting is being conducted, or the minutes of the meeting are being kept by audio recording. And I'm getting the agenda up here.
I can share that as well.
Okay. We, thank you. I didn't notice whether we have members of the public here for comment. I understood that we were expecting they might be here. I don't see their names in the participants list. Are there any members of the public available who wish to make public testimony? Hearing none, I guess we'll go on with the agenda. I see environmental briefing is scheduled.
Carrie, do you want to drive your presentation?
I would like that, yes. All right. Okay, can everybody see the slides or someone give me a thumbs up?
Yes.
Looking good? All right, great. Thanks for having me, y'all. Carrie Sandeman, I'm the Environmental Program Manager. I also lead the Planning Department. I've been here just under 18 months, just a little bit longer than Peggotty. And this time I haven't had a chance to provide a briefing on the natural resources in the district and also the environmental program as it has come into shape. So that is one of the primary objectives here today, is to give that overview of both of those things. And then as we wrap up, I want to talk about and propose a staff recommendation to develop a high-level environmental policy that provides some sideboards for staff in their decision making. First things first, why do we have an environmental program? It's good business. We are an agency that moves water around as our primary activity. And anytime you do that, you are pretty deep into a web of environmental regulatory systems and natural systems. And so having sophistication, acting with intention and expertise in terms of how we touch the natural environment and how we navigate permitting systems helps us to deliver the work that we do. It helps us to stay on track, helps us to stay on budget. It's good business. The other reason that we have an environmental program at MCDD and in our service to Penn 2 is that it's an organizational value to consider our impact on the environment. That means that we don't always make the most environmentally conservative or protective choice, but we understand what we're doing and we consider the implications before acting. In my mind, a big reason for this is that so many of our assessment payers, our nonprofit and community partners, and our agency and organizational partners that we work so closely with do have missions, internal values for the natural environment. And the last reason that we have an environmental program that I want to highlight today is that it's where we're headed. The Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District has amongst its purposes to contribute to improved water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, floodplain restoration, and landscape resilience. The districts today cannot do everything that the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District can do. We have more limited authorities. However, the extent to which we act within our current work, within our current authorities, with intention and expertise, provides a bridge to the agency that we will be and builds the processes and capacity of staff towards the role that they'll have in that new district. before I go into the specifics of our services, I just want to zoom out for a minute and talk about what I mean when I'm saying environment or natural resources as it relates to the Columbia Slough watershed, and then talk through some of the specific ways that our work intersects with these different natural resources and fish and wildlife. The area that is the managed floodplain before the installation of the levees and since time immemorial was a dynamic natural floodplain with integrated channels, wetlands, lakes, water levels that went up and down, land and water that traded places probably on an annual basis. And also since time immemorial, Native peoples have lived on this landscape and continue to today. Some of the Middle Chinookan people listed at the top there, and you're going to learn just a whole lot more about this from Dr. David Lewis at the format this month. So I'll leave it there. Oh, did someone want to speak up? Okay. Just to say that Native people have and continue to be in this watershed. Starting with the installation of the levees, the Columbia Slough watershed has gone through a tremendous amount of transformation, from that dynamic natural floodplain to an agricultural landscape to the commercial, industrial, residential mix that we have today, especially in Pen 2. We have seen just massive changes. And I think that on the right-hand side here, we have the scores from the City of Portland's Watershed Health Report Card that I think provide a good way to think about how that last 100 years of transformation show up today. So you'll see a C+ for hydrology, kind of that, not quite 50-50, a little better than 50-50 here. So on the positive side, the lower slough is connected to the Columbia River. It has tidal influence, and also the entire system has above ground streams. There are a lot of urban streams that are in pipes entirely or in concrete lined channels. So we have a lot going for us in terms of natural hydrology. We also have heavily managed hydrology in especially MCDD and SDIC behind the levees. Water quality at a B- is frankly very hopeful. This watershed is a place where for a long time it was seen as somewhere that takes waste away. We had untreated municipal sewage, untreated industrial waste and stormwater that has created a legacy of contaminated sediments at the base of the slough. There's also the passage of the Clean Water Act, the installation of the city's wastewater treatment plant, and decades of cleanup work by Oregon DEQ, in which we participate, that have made huge strides in this regard. And then the last couple scores are for habitat and fish and wildlife. I want to treat those together. So the idea here is, I think this picture does a pretty good job of showing, especially for terrestrial species, it's a developed space. We're using a lot of this land area for homes, for businesses, for airports, which leaves less space for our wildlife friends. And from an aquatic side, as I mentioned a couple times, MCDD and SDIC are cut off from the Columbia and lower slough, so they don't have any space for fish to migrate in and out. And also, while that water quality is hugely improved, there are some ways in which it's really detrimental to fish if they do get in by being really hot and having a low oxygen content. And so what I hope you take away here in terms of the natural resources in the slough are that this is a landscape that's absorbed a lot of impact, and it's also a place that has a lot of life and a lot of opportunity for people to interact with nature in their backyards. And while I haven't emphasized it much, it's also a place where some of our natural resource challenges are also environmental justice issues. So for instance, being heavily developed, we have fewer trees, and hot days may have higher highs that are really challenging for folks without air conditioning and can lead to heat-related illness or hospitalization. Or for people who might add to their diet with fishing from the slough, those legacy sediments, those legacy chemicals in the sediments of the slough can accumulate in fish and potentially contribute to human health problems. Next, I'm going to go through some more particular like resource by resource things and how we interact with them. And then I'll pause for any questions or comments. Riparian vegetation, that's the forests next to streams. They're very ecologically important for improving water quality and providing habitat for fish and wildlife. We're very limited, especially in levees, with the kind of vegetation that the core standards allow us to have. And in other places, riparian vegetation is sometimes a challenge for our crew in being able to access and get down to the waterway to clear out blockages, or the trees maybe are what caused the blockages. On the flip side, when we have these forests shading the slough and our ditches, the water temperature is lower and we tend to see fewer aquatic weeds that can grow in big mats and clog our pump stations and make it more challenging for the crew and for the pumps to move water. And these are some of the species and preemptive, just thank you to the Columbia Slough Watershed Council. Max Samuelson provided these slides that have some of the nice photos of our resources. Also have our uninvited guests in the plant community, the vegetative invaders or invasive species. They can also, hopefully you don't have the personal experience with blackberry, but it can also provide some pretty dense barriers to crew accessing the slough. I just mentioned the way that the aquatic invasive species can clog our pump stations and create a headache for our crew. Got 5 species of reptiles. The 2 on the left are the native sensitive species, and the Peninsula Drainage Canal between Pen 2 and MCDD is actually a pretty exciting place for people that are into turtles. It shows up regionally as having some of the highest populations of Western painted turtle in the state and in the region. And the very rare Western pond turtle has been seen there as well. The red-eared slider, maybe I shouldn't make it so big. That's the uninvited guest of the turtle population, and one that we work with ODFW if we find to provide those animals to them. Fish, there are 12 species of native fish that use the slough at some point in their life cycle. The ones that drive our work the most are the salmonids, and particularly the ones that have threatened or endangered status. And they are able to access the Columbia and the lower slough. So anytime we do in-water work, whether it's repairing the sloughing of a bank or needing to dewater an area, we need to work with the Fish and Wildlife agencies to make sure that we don't impact those endangered species. Our furry friends, the American beaver in the top right's the one I'll highlight. This is the one that tends to be in professional speak, we have different objectives. The beaver would like to slow the water and drop the trees into the water, and we would like to keep the water moving. And so we are frequently figuring out how to both meet our objectives in the watershed and to live with beaver, because they, like riparian forests, they're ecologically very important. Bats, we don't do anything with bats, but I thought they were so cute. I didn't want to take them out. And also, you don't hear them yourself, but they are there. When I was in college, I got to do some bat monitoring. And as soon as they put on that device that detects the bats, whew, they are everywhere. So we have 7 species of bats, all of which can be found at Smith and Bybee and others throughout the slough. And then the last one I'll highlight is our birds. There are over 200 species of birds that can be found in the slough watershed by a more skilled observer than myself. And the ones I'll point out are the streak-horned lark in the bottom middle. That's an endangered species that's found at Broughton Beach in MCDD and on the PDX airfield. We also, in Pen 1, there's a great blue heron rookery, and throughout the district, if we're doing work in the canopy of the trees, there's a period of time where when nesting birds are there that we are cognizant and do not disturb them. And an Anna's hummingbird, many of them visit the headquarters all the time at my window. And I hope they're doing well without my feeder. But a lot of people love to go bird watching and engage with the wildlife when they see and hear birds in the slough. So I'm going to pause there because this is, I guess, a little bit of the transition from the resources that we have, the reason that as an agency we interact with the natural resources so much, and more to the specific work of the environmental program and the discussion about the policy. Are there any questions before I bash on? Okay, great. So in your packet, you would have seen this list, but with more detail of how one of the ways of defining the environmental services that I and others at the district provide to the staff. These are specifically constructed to be within our current authorities. They are about how do we deliver our services better, faster, more reliably by being sophisticated and working with nature when we can. The environmental program is something that's new as a concept at the agency, but many of these things were already happening because we have already been moving water in a regulatory environment for quite a while. It's that I've been able to put my arms around them, keep them all together and think about them and be strategic about them as a group and work with our ops, our engineering team, pretty much everybody to implement them. So I'm gonna kind of skip past this since you have so much of it in your packet and also highlight some of the successes in the last year related to these services. The first one is permitting and regulatory compliance related. We have programmatic permits so that every time we say regrade a ditch, we don't have to go get permits individually from the Corps of Engineers or for Department of State Lands. These help us be more predictable in how we can deliver those things and move more quickly and more cost effectively. I've provided 2 trainings for staff over the last 9 months about what those permits include and been doing the reporting to the state and federal agencies about our activity under those permits so that we can continue to have them in the future. I mentioned beavers and turtles. Our crew does a lot to live with these animals, and I think it's something that really stands out for others. The turtle practices are related to in the spring, the turtles come up the levee bank and lay their eggs, and then later in the summer, those little baby turtles hatch and come down, and so we try to be cognizant of that when we're mowing to reduce impacts on those animals. And the beavers, we have a series of tasks that we do to live with them on the landscape. My third bullet is something we're hoping to develop for when we've gone through all our steps of trying to live with beaver on the landscape. We're working with a number of local, state, and federal agencies to identify a way to move animals that we've done all we could to work with in place to watersheds where they'll be part of ecological restoration. So that's in development. And then the last one I think I'll highlight for you all is the mapping and controlling aquatic invasives. This has been particularly active in Pen 2. Excuse me. As of last year, there were some ditches where it achieved 90% reductions in the aquatic invasive species that were clogging pump stations. These are really aggressive plants, so that's a good number. And also where we identified 3 new species that were introduced somehow, and we were able to control and remove before they even got started. So that's a really effective way of not letting something get to be a big problem before you deal with it. For the sake of time, I'm going to click over these last ones, which are a little more in the other districts, and talk about where I think we are headed. So the environmental program, since I came on in the fall of 2019, has taken shape and will continue to iterate, and will also be supporting the new district as they shape what their environmental program is going to be. And in the meantime, Peggy and I have discussed the value of an environmental policy for our staff today. and something that provides the high-level sideboards of, this is our lane, naturally speaking, and these are the priorities of our boards. This is something that we would like to see from all 4 boards, if possible, so that we're able to act in a consistent way and direct staff consistently across the 4 districts. And so you see the proposed process there to bring a draft policy to individual district board meetings in August. And in between now and then, be working with legal, with our staff, and with volunteers, ideally 1 from each board, to put together what that draft policy that might come back to you would be. And from there, revisions and hopefully onto adoption across the districts. So these are the next steps. I'm going to pause. We don't need a resolution from this, which is why there wasn't one in your packet. This is informal direction to proceed, and ideally today or in follow-up with Peggotty, volunteer to be an advisor and participate on a work group in developing this policy.
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
I'm not scientific, so I'm volunteering Kathy Kellen for this. But that said, I'm sorry I was late to join the meeting. And I've been involved for 6-7 years at the Blue Heron Wetlands, working with Alex Staunch when he was a graduate student. He's the one that started the whole invasive policy, spent, I don't remember, $60-some thousand in the Blue Heron Wetlands. Will this policy cover, because, and I don't want to belabor this, but will it cover private, like the wetlands? It's not a mitigated wetlands. There's, I think you're aware of the one that's down below Oak Harbor. When they did development, they were supposed to create a wetlands, and then neighbors were supposed to keep it up, and they didn't. Blue Heron Wetlands has been maintained mostly now with the DEQ grant that's in place. But going forward, it's, even in my unscientific mind, everything's going to grow back and need to be maintained. And if there's not a grant or not anything, then it will just go back to that huge population of invasive species. And that's where I learned the word Ludwigia peploides. I don't remember the second one they found there, but how are we going to protect those areas, or can they be protected? Will this be part of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District? Will it be transferable if we do it district-wide? How will that work going forward for the whole big district? Because I know there's lots of other areas.
So I think I heard a couple questions. What would be the role of an environmental policy in addressing, say, ecological restoration and management of invasive species on private property? And also, what is the relationship between this policy? Is there an ability to leverage that towards the new district? Yeah, okay. I think that the first one, I mean, it's a bit of a punt to say, well, what do you think? But I think the sideboards of what's included, and I'm interested to hear that from you and to work with the board advisors to identify what's in and what's out. I think under our current, we will be working with Hong also, and so always thinking about what's within our current authorities, what are the activities that help us deliver those services, and be always able to draw a line back to, we're doing this because it helps us deliver our core services. So I think we're setting sideboards that help make it a little bit more clear what that means.
So that can be a part of the discussion, because the one thing I learned, you can get rid of all the invasive species in the Blue Heron Wetlands, but then it's just going to go into the slough, into the golf course, into all their waterways, and it doesn't just stop because of a property line. So that was one of my takeaway learning things.
It is.
Okay, so it'll be part of the discussion, and that's fine. And I guess how transferable it would be, that discussion leading into the urban flood safety, water quality. I mean, we spend a lot of time doing this. Are we going to have to redo it for the flood safety, water quality?
And Mary Helen, this is Peggy. I really look at this when Carrie and I were discussing. This is kind of that broad-based guidepost, as she referred to, guidelines to help us do our work within the 4 districts. And I look at it also as kind of a foundation, but I anticipate that the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District is going to go into much more detail and have much more specific guidelines as they relate to environmental. But this is really to help the existing districts and staff to work within some guideposts as they move forward as it relates to permitting and things like that that we do every day. Is that helpful?
Yes. Thanks.
This is Val Humble. I'm glad to hear a number of things being mentioned about within our guidelines and things like that, because my concern is always, although we want to do everything we can to improve the environment, we need to stay within the constriction of the law. We collect taxpayers' money for a specific stated purpose in the law, and so we need I think, a good policy that would explain any money we spend for things outside of the drainage district, things specified in the law. So I'm glad to hear Shannon mention that you're looking at that, and that legal is going to be looking at that, and that we're going to be careful about not willy-nilly spending stuff that isn't authorized by the law we operate under.
Yeah, absolutely. That has been a high on my list since I started, and maybe this is part of why I was selected for this position. But I am a believer that there are certain times when investment in the environment is the environment and for its own sake, and those aren't necessarily the things that an agency like us is focused on. But there are opportunities that benefit the service that we deliver and also benefit the environment, like, for instance, addressing aquatic invasive weeds that really have real dollars and cents cost savings for impact on our pump stations, for example. So yes, I hear you, and I'm glad that was adequately reflected, because it is a high priority for us.
Excellent. Any other supervisor have a comment or question? Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Oh, I just wanted to say I really appreciate seeing this. This has been really helpful, particularly from the Watershed Council side, to framework and potential policy. So I'm supportive of. I'm available to participate committee, or like someone from.
Okay, cut out a little bit there, Kathy, but I think that we heard your support and your potential volunteerism. So yes, great. Okay, and I saw a thumbs up from Mary Helen.
Well,
So-
she accepted my nomination.
Oh, okay. Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you. And I guess we have Bill Owen next on assets and liabilities. Well, Bill.
Good morning, all. Let me share my screen as well. Are you able to see this this image of the front slide? I see Val's head going up and down, so that's great. So thank you for having me back to talk about this important topic. As you know, the Assets and Liabilities project has been going on for several months now. You've been given some background information about the project This slide is a reminder to you that there's a central drive and purpose for the project, and it's to provide an equitable framework to inventory and value those assets and liabilities for not only Penn 2, but the other 3 districts as you all transition to the new urban district. There are several members from those districts that are working as a project working group or board working group. Mary Helen is part of that group and is participating as a representative from Penn 2. And we have the benefit of some assistance from for facilitation from Kearns West, as well as some technical assistance from the FCS group. You can tell from this slide that we've made some progress on the project. We are now at a point of showing you some sample products that would be in the final deliverable. And that was after we had a discussion regarding definitions and valuations of assets and liabilities. So we're generally on schedule and hoping to get a final verdict by the end of June in order to deliver to the new Urban District Board subsequently. So what's the purpose today? Well, there are 3 things I wanted to bring to your attention. One is the general table of contents, which will likely be the backbone of the final deliverable, as well as some sample numbers that you might see, or at least in the format that you might see for some of this information. So let's start with the table of contents. It's been my experience, it's nice to have an executive overview. It's usually a page or 2, depending on the length of the total documents. But immediate, and that information is basically the same text as found in the rest of the document, but just in a summary version up front. We'll go through the purpose and the background of the work and of this particular report, and with information you saw just moments ago, as well as others relating to ORS 550. The third section is something that I may not have dwelled on much in past, but it deals with the third leg of the pieces of information that you as a district board need to transfer over to the new urban district, and that is concepts of what duties does your drainage district include. And those duties, this is a description that Hung Nguyen, our general counsel, will provide through a description based on her research of ORS statutes, as well as resolutions that have been passed by your district board and other legal documents that specify duties. So we thought that would be a good way to sort of lay the foundation of what is in context of what the assets and liabilities are based upon. The next section deals with definitions and methodologies. And we've talked about this over the last couple of months, and there may be an expanded version of the methodologies that you may not have heard of yet, with regards to some other considerations that I'll get to in a little bit here. The fifth section deals with sort of the traditional list of assets and liabilities for Penn 2 and the other special districts. And these will most likely mirror what's in the 2020 financial statements of the independent auditors report. I have information here on the next slide that shows what the 2019 data is from the auditors report, but not. I understand that we'll have the 2020 version in time for our June deliverable. The other considerations are those that you may have heard a little more, and because the staff has talked about this probably more often. And this is where we are identifying future capital investments that we anticipate will be that the new urban district, will need to address. So that includes the feasibility study recommendations. It includes intangible assets, including what existing ones that we already have, the water right and MCDD, but also what easements, both from the levee side and internal drainage side, do we have and what are missing. And so there are, I'm anticipating putting together some tables, and at this point, at least, I'm not anticipating we value those future easements. But that's that topic is still to be vetted over the next couple of months. But at a minimum, we'll identify what areas still require easements for continued operation. So what else could be included under other considerations? Well, the FEMA levee accreditation projects, these are the original ones that Cornforth has identified through the certification process a couple of years ago. There were 7 of them, actually now 8 of those. Some of those have been also been represented by the feasibility study project recommendations. So whatever's not listed in there, we'll make sure to include here with cost estimates. We're putting together a 20-year major capital improvement plan. You've routinely see 5 and 10-year projections of capital improvements. This will look out even further for a 20-year projection. We'll also look at 20-year operating capital requirements that include things such as rehabilitation of dry wells, rebuild of pumps or motors, and other things that are not major capital investments. We'll have to identify what the difference is. Maybe there's a dollar threshold of $1 million, for example, which would say those above would fall under the major capital plan and those below would be under the operating capital requirements. We've also been asked to make sure we include capital contributions from other agency partners. This examples include the City of Portland for their support of some investments over in Penn 1, the City of Troutdale in their investment over in SDIC and others that we know about. And finally, we want to make sure we list what capital improvements we feel are important that need to be addressed over the next 20 years, for instance, on assets that the districts currently don't own, but we keep track of and are important to our system to operate properly. Couple examples that come quickly to mind include the Northeast 82nd Avenue culverts, where the middle slough goes under Northeast 82nd Avenue, is in poor shape, but that is something that's owned by the City of Portland. There are some Marine Drive culverts out in SDIC. They're just upstream of the Sandy pump station that from anecdotal information suggests they're not in good structural shape. And so there is some uncertainty about the MLK culverts that separate, or they're close to Jubit's area, that allow water from the east side to flow under MLK over towards Muir Road Pump Station. So those are the type of examples I'm thinking about that fall under this last section of other considerations. And of course, you would have the appendices that go that provide technical background to the summary information in the main report. So, as I said earlier, this is a section I think it was section 5 of this project deliverable. And this reflects what the 2019 auditor's report shows for our assets and liabilities that our finance department tracks. And so you can, I tried to pull out information for each of the 4 districts. There are some situations where the assets are categorized a little bit differently than others. So for instance, in your district, the auditor's report included something called inventory, where in other districts that information is buried under a different category. And so I need to make sure and clean up some of that type of information. So the values still are shown in here, but the information presented in a way that's a little more digestible for someone who's not been looking at this frequently. So again, traditional concepts of assets and liabilities from an accounting background primarily is what we would expect in this section of the report. And the last section deals with those other considerations. You can see the numbers in here for each of the major categories. There are duplicate costs in here, so I need to clean this up before the final report is, or even a full draft of it is prepared for you in May. So you have an idea of not only what are your assets and liabilities on your books, but also what we might expect moving forward. So I mean, if you add up these numbers, it's a fair bit of money. It's over $150 million. Again, there's duplicate information in here, so the number will drop. But it starts giving people a sense of how much we're talking about in terms of investments needed for each of these 4 districts. So I'll pause there and ask if there are any questions. I'll note that the staff is in the process of filling out this type of information, really, and the rest of the information on this table of contents. And we'll be looking to our board working group as a sounding board and for some general guidance on how we provide draft deliverables to you. I expect that group will meet in April with the intent to pull together a full draft report of the project in late May for each of the 4 boards. Having that board working group circle back in early June to help us understand how to incorporate the feedback we got from your board and the other 3 boards to produce a final product in late June. So I'll stop there and see if there's any comments or questions.
Well, thank you, Bill. I don't hear any questions, and if you don't, I suppose you can transition to your next report on the Port of the Meadows permitting development.
Let me just say, I don't have any questions. I just want to say that they've done a phenomenal job of pulling all this information together, making it be sensible. I say this, the other people on the committee are far more accounting savvy than I am, so they made it easy for me to explain as a board supervisor to our members. And so I think that's going to be the critical part of what are you doing with my money? And you've done a fantastic job. So I want to pass that on to everybody that's had a piece of this.
I'll definitely pass that on. Thank you, Mary Ellen.
And I'd like to thank you, Mary Ellen, for representing us on that group.
Yeah, I think I might have done better with rocket science than this. I did keep the question up, explain it so I can tell people who don't understand this, you know, so.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate that feedback. Okay, per Val's suggestion, I'll move on to the next agenda topic, and that deals with the development at Portland Meadows and an address 1501 North Schmear Road. The latter address is the property of the old Bar None accounting, still in the last agenda item, Bar None auction site. And this is the triangular piece of property between I-5 and the light rail area that stops by Vanport Park and Ride. So we talked about this topic the last time you all met. You know that those developments are occurring. They're a significant part of the, I guess, the western side of the Penn 2 area. Just as reminders, you've already invested money to replace the motor for first pumping system number 1. You have money set aside to at least rebuild the second motor in that pump station, as well as money set aside to upgrade the electrical system. And you also know from the last meeting that we noted that with those the pumping upgrade or rebuild, that I had said that the capacity of the pump station didn't need to change, but the volume of water getting to that pump station is going to change. So the pumping systems are going to be running longer. So there's more water, but the peak really isn't changing enough to make a difference at the pumping station. So why do I know that? And this is some information that I don't believe I presented to you last time. And the reason why I know that is because we did some sensitivity analysis, some what ifs. If we, as part of the development review, and our modeling consultants increase the pumping system by a significant amount, like 250% higher than it currently is. So it's 2.5 times the size. And it really made minimal, I can't say no, but because it's, I mean, an inch or two, it's almost insignificant amount of difference in the water level in the water behind Dick's Sporting Goods. So this would be the east side of the Hayden Meadows commercial area. And so why is that? Well, the reason is there's this 72-inch stormwater pipe that goes under Hayden Meadows. And if you scale back and scale up and try to think about how water moves, what happens is, even though 72 inches is pretty big, it's 6 feet, right? It's how tall it is. It's actually a constriction point. So the water has to neck down and pass through this pipe that goes under Hayden Meadows and then eventually discharges into the slough that becomes the forebay of the pump station. And so that constriction occurs is so significant that regardless what happens on the downstream end of that slough down there, the length of that pipe and the constriction on the top it almost becomes independent of what happens down below. So even though you create a super huge pump station down below, it doesn't affect the water levels much up above. It's a little difficult to wrap your head around that, but try to think of, I think about that pipe, even though it's 72 inches, being like a little straw. And so regardless how much you can, and there's a big pond down below, and there's only so much water you can push through. And basically we're maximizing the amount of water going through that pipe already. So almost regardless of what's happening downstream, what's happening upstream isn't impacted. So why is all this important? Well, that's important because I don't think it's in the best interest of your funds or anybody else's funds to increase the capacity of that pump station. What I do feel is that this increased volume of water from Portland Meadows, from the old Bar None auction site, will generate a lot more water going into the pump station. And so currently we have to go out and rake the debris grate in front of that pump station fairly regularly during storm events. And that's partly because the pumps are either on or off. So they're either at full throttle or off. And the VFDs, the variable frequency drives I mentioned in the agenda summary page, are a tool that we can do to lower the speed and allow more water to come in, and the debris doesn't accumulate as quickly. So we already know that's something in the long term that it would be a good investment for this district to do. But because of these two new developments, I feel that we should be accelerating that improvement at the pump station. And because we're accelerating that, I feel that it's appropriate to request Prologis, who happens to be the developer of both sites, to contribute to those upgrades. Penn 2 is already making contributions, as I said earlier, towards the pump 2, motor number 2, and the electrical system. What I'm suggesting we do is we work with Prologis to have them pay an additional amount that's equitable to them relative to other developments in the area, to pay the difference. So there's a base amount you're already paying. There's another amount that would be the sort of the full meal deal, and it's that difference that I am looking for Prologis to help us fund the VFD improvements and replacing the motor as opposed to rebuilding. So that is my recommendation. If you want a visual, you can go into your meeting packet, and at the end of this particular agenda item, there are two graphics. The first is a graphic of the. I guess I'll share this with you. I don't think Debbie has this. Right, can you all see this this agenda item or this meeting packet? Thumbs up. So the areas in red drain directly into Whitaker Slough, which is the slough that becomes the forebay of the pump station. So that's these two areas. Lot A, there's a big building here and lots of parking spaces. And quite honestly, for drainage purposes, this is no different than what was there before. There was a huge parking lot for the Portland Meadows bandstand. Here's the building for the old Portland Meadows site right here. So there's a roof over it. So for all practical purposes, it's almost a neutral or a net zero gain impervious area. The big differences, of course, are the rest of the sites. Lots D and E all will be almost completely impervious. That water will drain to the west to this outfall 1. Lots C and F will drain to the north to Dick's into the drainage area up here that goes behind Dick's Sporting Goods. In the future, they also own sites. I believe they own this site off of all 3, and there'll be a future improvements there, but that's not being proposed right now. The other sites, for those who are not familiar with it,
Bill, while you have that up there, where's the new street that they're putting in? Horseshoe Lane or something?
Yeah, good question. So here's the intersection of Schmear Road and Whitaker Road, right? And there's
Yeah. Okay.
I think there's a stop sign there. In the event, if you go backwards to the point where the old bandstand used to be, a grandstand, not bandstand, a grandstand, it's right here. So it goes north
Okay.
and then hangs a left westward and then ends up on Whitaker Slough.
Okay.
So it's a, I don't know if it's really is a horseshoe.
So that's additional impervious surface as well.
It is impervious surface. There's a, as I said, there's maybe a little bit of additional surface here that's impervious and it wasn't there before, but in most part, this was all parking lot and building before.
Okay.
So there, you're right, Mary Helen, there may be a little bit, but in the greater scheme of things, the rest of the site is.
PBOT goes after people who increase the street size 2 feet. So, I mean.
They certainly do. They certainly do. So that's what's happening at Portland Meadows, the old Portland Meadows site. This is what's happening at the old Bar None site. Here's I-5 here on the right side. Interstate Avenue and the light rail system is over here on the left. We are in negotiations with them, with Prologis, again, for making sure we have the proper easements against the levee system on this left side. That's what the red is. But we also want to make sure we have proper drainage easements over the new red pipe that they're putting in here. The reason why that's important is because there are 2 of your 5 levee relief wells located about in this little area right here, pretty close to where Schmear intersects with Interstate Avenue. And the outflow of those levee relief wells drain to this property. So the water and the groundwater will fill up and then drain down these pipes, and those pipes end up spilling into this property. And so we want to make sure this stormwater line is accessible to us for the future. So this area, you can see, is going to basically be built out. There's going to be a building here with lots of parking space here. Most, as you probably well know, this area is pretty heavily compacted gravel already, and which means that most of the water is running off. Even your assessment methodology recognizes gravel areas as 80% impervious. And so when we distribute your assessment dollars over all properties, we recognize this gravel area is contributes quite a bit. And so the reason why I bring this up is while this will physically change significantly from the naked eye, the amount of water that's running off may not change as dramatically as what you see from the road. So it's still an increase, and we still recognize that it's something that we need to account for. And this would be part of their Prologis' equitable share to account for additional runoff coming from this site too. So I'm a little winded, so I'm going to stop there and let others comment on what our proposal is. And again, the proposal is to let us negotiate with Prologis to share to obtain an equitable share of money to contribute to those improvements I've described.
Okay, I have a couple. Oh, go ahead, Val.
I'd like you to confirm that I've got a good understanding of what you just told me. So apparently, the increase in impervious area, which is mostly in the Portland Meadows area, is split into 2 halves. Half of it's going to flow relatively soon, quickly into the Whitaker Slough, and the other half's going to flow into the Dick's Ditch and have to come through that 6-foot pipe. So assure me that there is enough ponding in that Whitaker Slough so that a downpour on that is not going to overflow the slough or the ponding and back it up through the pipe. It would slow it down through the pipe as well by doing that. Is there enough ponding there?
There is enough flood storage space in that channel to do that, and that's been confirmed by 3 different modeling teams now.
Excellent.
And it also by, for lack of a better word, our spidey sense from our operations team that understands what's happening there. If anything, we may consider doing some dredging. Make sure that pipe is completely open at the bottom, but that's something Penn 2 does periodically every 10, 20 years or so.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mary Helen, go ahead.
Preemptively, I have been tracking this for some time just because of people whispering in my ear from the city. And I'd like to set up a Zoom call with you and whoever, because I recently got myself volunteered to be the land use chair for East Columbia for the specific purpose of dealing with pro lodges. Some big developers in Portland know pro lodges. I haven't been able to because I fell and separated my ribs, so that's why I haven't contacted you. But I want them to, you call equitable payment, I'm calling it goodwill. TMT Development, when they did Hayden Meadows and caused disruption in the neighborhood, Walmart, when they built, they all contributed to funds in the neighborhood for picnics, etc. This is far greater, far bigger. And I think that when they come in and have an impact like this, which they do, and there's historical stuff, and I don't want to belabor it, but just so the other people know, tens of thousands of dollars. But the history and guidance that I've gotten is if you don't ask them, they won't come give you a bag of money. The negative impact that could have with the neighbors, and I'm going to say Ken as well, or anyone that shops in that area, is in the beginning, everybody will adapt because what is. But I think because of the impact that they're causing, and I don't want the landowners of Penn 2 to pay a penny for any costs that are involved in maintaining or dealing with the impact that they're going to have. But the part that I haven't been able to do is have a Zoom call with you and Peggotty or whoever to say, what's it going to cost to do what they're doing to maintain flood safety for the neighborhood? The other piece of that is I call it goodwill, but there's a heck of a lot of homeless people that they're being able to relocate, which they need to be, but there's contributions that can be made. And I think, I mean, no offense here, but coming from citizens, from the neighborhoods, is going to have an impact. I can't go to my neighbor and say, oh, Amazon just built this big facility and we have to upgrade and do all of this, and it's going to cost you $10 more a year or $100 more. I don't know what those figures are. So if it's agreeable to you, I'd like to talk with you about that approach, because not only is it technical and what you have to do to provide flood safety or improvements, it's costly to landowners, and we shouldn't have to pay for their development costs. So that's my political speech.
And a nice one it was.
I'm happy to set up a call with you.
Can it be next week sometime, or is there an urgency this week? Or
there is starting to become a little more urgency. As you said, this alluded to, this project's been going on for a while. They're getting closer to the end of their permits, and so I want to make.
It can be this week, because obviously I can prop myself up with heating pads and.
Yeah, well, I think next week will be fine. But
Okay.
I'll work with Emily and Peggotty to find a time that's convenient for you.
Okay. I don't know how the other board supervisors feel, but this one, bigger seems like not as, I don't know how to say this. I don't think they should be treated any more differently than somebody that's just, throwing garbage in the slough and doing something that's costing us money. I mean, they need to be made aware of the impact and what they're moving into. And I don't know if they do, and I don't know your conversation, so that can all be later. But I don't want to belabor this, but I don't know how we could explain to the landowners that we're just going to absorb this cost from a giant organization. So, and I think impacts to the slough. I mean, I don't know. I don't have that information. So how, more water is going to affect, fish and frogs and whatever else is in there. So.
And I think that a good part of that conversation, Mary Helen, what can we legally do?
Yeah.
But what other people that are providing permits can also do, so that it might be something that's not directed, may not be directly to our permit, because Bill has made sure that they're going to pay for their incremental costs. But I hear what you're saying about contributions. And so I'd be curious to know what the city of Portland and others may be doing to mitigate the impact on the community.
Yeah, so Bill, if you could help with who at the city is managing the permits or certain parts of the permits. I was going to today to fire an email off to Rebecca Esau and BDS and see, but you probably know who the working ones are and get there faster.
I will certainly see if I can track that down. As you will know,
Yeah.
there are lots of fingers in the pie.
It's probably 5 or 6 of them. But.
Yeah, there may well be, but I will track down and see if we can figure that out. The developer did mention something about traffic improvements, lights that are going to be installed at Vancouver and Schmear, and I believe at Whitaker and Schmear. Along with some of the things, but I'll track down and see if I can find someone who has a broader overview of those city permit pieces. I saw Kathy and Leslie's hands both up.
I just wanted to say, I was recently driving on Schmear around 9 in the morning, and all of the Amazon vehicles going out of there it was one after the other. There was probably 50 of them. So the pollution that's going to be started by having all those on those parking lots, it's huge.
Yep.
Yeah, no, and I'm just hoping we're not too little too late, but I think regulatory, we have it in, so.
Kathy?
Yeah, hear me okay?
You're a little delayed, but you're okay.
Yeah, sorry.
You might turn off your video and just go on your vocal.
Was it? Okay, I just wanted to say that the council had tried to weigh in, and we got a fair amount of flack from our agency partners. And came in late. We know that there have been a lot of discussions between the landowner and contractors that they've hired for the project, and many of the participating regulatory agencies and stakeholders. Many of our institutional partners felt that our comments were unfounded, were not pertinent. And that work that's.
You're still cutting out a little bit, Kathy. I'm sorry.
I'll just say, after the permit.
And maybe it would be helpful to have you, Kathy, in that conversation with Mary Helen, so that if you've had some experience, you can bring it to the table as we have that discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the pessimist citizen to me. I did do some recognizance on my own because the neighborhood, East Columbia, didn't respond to any of the permit hearings, but I was trying to find out what's going on. And this is huge money for the city. So this is the pessimistic side of me. They're getting a whack of money out of Prologis and Amazon in permit fees. And so that might have been part of what Kathy was saying, because it was broken up. But yeah, join in so we can find out who said what when, because I'm coming into this, at the 9th hour or 12th hour or whatever hour it is.
So Mary Helen is correct that Penn 2 has received money from previous developers in this area. What I've started doing some numbers, and the estimates I'm and proposals I'm making to Prologis is north of 100,000. So this is going to it's not going to be an insignificant amount. But I'm happy to talk to Kathy and Mary Helen next week to help provide what information we can, and hopefully we can pull in somebody from BDS that's helping to orchestrate the city's response.
And I'm glad to hear that you're planning to accelerate the improvement of the pump station, get that variable drive and the electrical system to support it. That'll put us in a good position.
I think it will. Yeah, thanks.
Anything else from the supervisors? Okay, Bill, I guess you're up.
So, yeah, Val, I wonder if I could just get some clarification. Are you anticipating that your feedback would be, any additional feedback would be through Mary Ellen and Kathy before I continue my conversation with Prologis? I'm trying to get a sense whether or not you feel that this concept of a equitable share from them is appropriate.
No, I think it's, in my opinion, maybe somebody else thinks different. That conversation can be expanded. I think as citizens, we're coming into it because I was going to use both a citizen landowner that's going to be shouldered with the cost of what they do, their impacts. Any other goodwill kind of thing they want to do can be added on. But at this point, hearing this report, I think you should go forward and not negate any good things that can happen from that. And then maybe in another week or two, I mean, in a sequence after we talk, come up with a strategic plan to say, oh, by the way, the citizens are concerned too. We won't shop, and I won't go that far until people want to get their protest signs out. But and a lot of people have a lot of things to complain about Amazon. Then, as Leslie mentioned, air quality is a big one, especially along I-5 and adding. I heard 350 trucks a day, so 700 ins and outs of diesel trucks. But I support you going forward to get as much as we can, because that might be all we get. I mean, you have the leverage of a permit, so we just have the leverage of concerned citizens.
This is Val. To answer your specific question, Bill, I'm comfortable with what I believe you're planning to do on the permitting amounts. Does any other supervisor have any reason to say they want to have a final say before he goes ahead? I'm comfortable. Does that answer your question, Bill?
I believe it does. Thank you for the time.
Okay. And now I guess you're up also for the some property requests.
Yeah,
You're the star today, huh?
Unfortunately for you, you get to see me 3 times in a row. So the third topic deals with the South Shore Philoma drainage issues that you've been talking about for years. Most recently, we had pulled that pump and pipe that we've had out for several years there. We did respond after a larger event in January and drew the water down and then pulled the pump. That pump, for those who didn't know, the pump was located on the corner of 13th and South Shore Road, and then there was a hose going down parallel 13th to the roadside ditch further south. Following the big snowstorm and ice events, the water got up to a similar level. And honestly, it's a little bit of a head scratcher. I'm not sure why it's responding, the drainage is responding this way. But from what I can tell, my instinct is that the problems downstream with the existing pipe that we know is in bad shape, I think have only just worsened and just continue to become a barrier for water to drain there. So water got up actually over the amount that level that got up over the level amount that was occurred in January, and in February we remobilized. I wanted to make sure that you know that Debbie Castleton from BES is here. So if we at the end of my presentation, if you have any questions for BES, Debbie can be able to respond. So before we ended up mobilizing for this second pumping event, I worked with BES to come up with a funding package that they were able to provide to help support emergency pumping services. And that was signed in mid-February, February 18th. And it was with that money, not with Penn 2 money, that we ended up mobilizing again and pumping not from the corner of 13th and South Shore, but instead from private property owners' backyard, and pumped up and into a stormwater pipe on Paloma Road. So the location was different. The private drainage is the same, and we still used our pumping services. In order to do that, we had to set up what we started with. It was a more temporary setup where we had a hose that went across Paloma Road, and then that hose sort of bent down into the street inlets on the north side of Paloma, and then into the stormwater pipe that BES owns. Unfortunately, after about 2 days or so, there was enough vehicle traffic that ended up puncturing our hose. And so we ended up having to purchase, again, all this is with BES money, purchase a steel pipe and place that over Paloma Road and put an asphalt berm over that pipe to protect it. For those who have driven by there, you've experienced that that little speed bump there that's out there. So that's out there. It looks very similar to what we set up several years ago, and something we took down, knowing that this board was not interested in providing continuous pumping services over there. And per your direction, we did pull that down. But unfortunately, we had to recreate something similar to that in order to finish the pumping services this time around. But my intent is to remove that when the BES pipe is installed and operating. So we did do a series of pumping scenarios or situations out there. And this time around, I paid more attention to the city's noise ordinance and limited our pumping from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and not overnight hours. The property owner where this pump was located did go around to her neighbors to get their feedback on whether if 24-hour pumping is available, it would be okay. They said it was fine for 2 nights over a weekend, but then they requested that we return back from the 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. sequence. So, so we did pumping for a little over a week in that sequence, and we ended on March 1st, and then we removed the pump and hose because I wanted to make sure that equipment was available for other pumping needs, emergency pumping needs throughout not only your district, but the other districts that we manage. And secondly, I didn't want to leave the pump there, knowing that you have an interest to suggest that we are not providing long-term pumping services there. It's only for temporary or emergency purposes, honestly. And so I didn't want to give the impression that since leaving the pump there, we can just run down and turn it on whenever we want. So the berm is still there. My intent again is to keep it there until the new pipe is installed and operating. I hope that's in fall of this year. And then we would pull that down, remove the pipe and the asphalt. We've spent probably just over 10,000 of that 15,000 for this last pumping sequence. So we have some money left. So we have enough for another round of pumping. There were a number of things that we were struggling with the first time around that we won't have to do in the future. So even with the money left over, we'll be able to pump the water down a fair amount. We may not be able to pump it down as much as we did this last time around, though. So, and we would start doing that pumping if the water level exceeds the level that first mobilized us in January, which is just over 7 feet in the photo of the gauge of the photo you have in your meeting packet. So I wanted to give you that update and ask for your direction regarding what our intent, what our intended response is going to be if pumping is needed in the future. And again, that's to exhaust the remaining amount, what's left over of that 15,000 to do pumping. But after that, we had not planned to do any additional work out in that area. Before I'll stop, you did ask that we put together a contract for private property owners there for our staff to go out and do pumping for them. We did do that, and we included the exhibits from one version of that contract in your meeting packet as an example of what we might do. So the assumptions in that that exhibit are about the length of the pumping time is probably underrepresented. It would be, we'd have to pump longer given our last experience. And so the dollar amounts in that contract would have to go up if they decide to go that direction. So any thoughts, comments, and ultimate direction about my suggestion here?
Well, this is Val again. My reaction is that, well, first of all, thank you to the BES for stepping up and providing some money on there and assuming some of the responsibility for helping these neighbors. So that I'm grateful for that. Given that there is some of that money unspent, it seems to me personally that we would have no grounds for denying pumping should it become necessary again until we do exhaust those monies. We wouldn't be spending any of our taxpayers' money on it. It would be BES money, and they've, I guess, authorized us to do that. So that's my personal reaction, that if it's needed, we should do it up until the money is expended. I guess beyond that, my reaction would be we go back to Ernest, who had indicated his willingness to sign a contract and actually pay for it beyond that. Another question I'm having is, what's the probability that that's going to happen? I guess if you were surprised with how fast it rose before, maybe it's a little hard to predict, but from past experience, what's the likelihood that it's going to rise again to that level before the summer?
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about as well. We had about the rainfall gauge that BES maintains at the Walmart site in Hayden Meadows showed it had above average rain event of 1.35 inches just before this storm. Part of that was the snowfall that occurred, and then the rains afterwards. There was a decent amount of rain that came down. The short answer is I would expect would have at least one more event, where this would happen. And if we can get to June, say mid to end of June, I would not expect we would have another one until maybe Halloween time. And if all goes well and Debbie can get her team to get the work done, then the pipe will be installed and operational in October, and we can if we can't do it by that point, we may get some bigger storms in November where this could happen again. So at least one more this spring, at least, given the drainage pattern we're seeing now, and crossing our fingers that the construction project will end before Halloween.
And do you think that that the remaining funds from the BES grant, as it were, will cover that pumping, or do you think we're going to need something beyond that?
I don't think so. I don't think we'll get all the way down to what we did this time. We pumped for probably just over 100 hours. And the money that's left over, we'll probably see somewhere around 60 to 70 hours of pumping. So we won't get all the way down like we did this time around, but we'll get a fair ways down.
Okay.
I showed that we're going to start construction potentially September. So, hopefully even sooner, but we're almost finished with design of the new pipe, and it looks like they're actually working on a trench as well. So this is a good amount of pipe, and at least 18 inches. So it should be pretty substantial.
Yep. Yeah, Debbie's absolutely correct. They're not only are they installing that pipe, but they are replacing. From what I can tell from the design drawings, they're replacing one driveway culvert, and then, as Debbie alluded to, they're actually doing some excavation of the downstream ditch. So the roadside ditch isn't higher than the pipe that they're installing, which would be a bad thing, right? So we want to make sure that everything is flowing downhill. And so in fact, we as Penn 2, we might consider doing some of our maintenance of a little more maintenance of that drainage ditch, the roadside ditch that's further south of their project location, to help with that flow of water going downstream. And we'll talk about more during the budget proposals over the next couple of months.
It does sound like a good idea.
I know we're running late, but I just, I think I brought this up before about insurance, liability. When we asked those homeowners to put sandbags on the side of their property, I sit on the North Portland neighborhood insurance, and the neighborhood's insured, but not for hazardous activity. And so our neighborhood chair has been informed that it can't ask people to do hazardous activities, but what's going to happen to those sandbags, and how are they going to get out of there? Are we just going to leave them on the property? Sorry, I got a guy here putting a recumbent bike together that I probably won't be able to ride for about a month. But anyway, I don't know, and I think Hong's still on the call. Maybe no, maybe not. How best to go forward? I mean, who's going to remove the sandbags? Because I've already heard that story. Are you going to get volunteers to help us get the sandbags out of there? And when there's, and I know BES and easements and the city knows how to do all that. I just don't want to put Pen 2 in jeopardy of some sort of liability, because I can see that it could happen with all the parties involved. So
Well,
how does that, yeah.
So this is Hong. I can try to answer that question. So my understanding is these sandbags were put there to help a local flooding issue. And so whether they stay there or not really is dependent on the local neighborhood. If there's a desire for the district to help remove them, it should be limited to district staff removing them. In that case, our staff would be protected, would be covered under the insurance. The district shouldn't be trying to open it up for volunteers to move it on behalf of the district. Does that make sense? They can try to remove it on somebody else's behalf or on their own, but if there's a desire for the district staff to help, it should be district staff doing the work because they're under the insurance policy.
Just as backup information, I drove by yesterday evening and I noticed that the sandbags on the South Shore are still in the front yard, just stacked out there where they were supplied. They haven't been in place as far as I could tell. However, the ones on Paloma are in place around the structure. So there's that difference in where they are. Any other supervisor have a comment or anything? My understanding then is we're going to continue with our policy that it's not our liability as a Pen 2 to solve this problem. We want to assist and certainly appreciate the assistance of the BES. And I suppose we might have to ante up any additional funds required if we need another pumping. But my inclination after that would be to go back, especially to Ernest, who indicated a willingness to fund it, to have him pay that excess. Does any supervisor have any comment about how exposed we should be on the spending money on an additional pumping? I don't hear anything else you want to know, Bill?
Oh,
No, I think I will though offer
Karen might have something to say. Did you have something, Karen?
I did. I was trying to figure out how do I could talk. Has this gentleman that offered to pay been submitted the proposed costs, the contract at all?
Yes,
And did he have a response?
he did. He thought, so we've had two proposals to him. The first one was more than what he was expecting. And so we tried to figure out a different version of that. And the amount came down substantially, but he has not taken us up on that offer yet.
Okay.
So I want to make sure that Cotter and Carrizo has an opportunity to let you know what she's planning to do to connect with the community after this meeting, to set some expectations for those neighborhood residents. Sorry, Cotter, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Very faint.
Great. So just based on a decision that the board's taken today, Debbie Castleton with the city and myself are working on a joint letter from BES and MCDD that will include information about the expectations of pumping operations for the remainder of the year, information about the pipe replacement project from BES, and then just clarification about who landowners can contact if they have any questions about either of those operations. So that letter will be sent to all property owners along South Shore and Paloma Road, not just the properties that have been directly impacted by recent flooding events. And then if necessary, we will do additional notices, but we intend to deliver this as a follow-up to today within the next 2 weeks.
And can you give us copies of that? Because I get he said, she said stories from neighbors, and I don't know, they say, you know, a man from MCDD or a woman from MCDD told me that,
Mhm.
and I don't know who it is, and I sort of have to go through a physical description. But
Yeah.
and then I
we-
just wanted to comment that I like Debbie's little friend that's in the picture with her.
Thank you,
my
Tyler.
favorite
Yes,
part-
Mary Helen, we will share. We
Okay,
will share
yeah,
that.
just so we know what's being told and they don't make up stories.
Absolutely.
Are we done then, Bill?
We are done, unless you had any other questions.
No, I guess we're ready for new business,
Thank you.
which usually means, yes, what new business do we have?
Okay, generally falls on my head. This is Peggy, and just want to give you an update more specifically on the executive director position. We got a lot of applications, which was very good. We are commencing the first round of screening this week and anticipate that there'll be the first round of interviews on the 17th and 18th. We're hoping we're able to narrow it down to about 8 at that point in time. And second round is likely March 31st. We also want to provide an opportunity for MCDD's deputy directors and staff to have some conversation with the top 2 candidates. So I anticipate a selection at the end of the first week of April, and tend to anticipate a new director sometimes in May is the place we're standing right now. Second of all, I just want to let you know, we have submitted, and I give huge congrats to Mark and Colin and Evan. We submitted our letter and financial certification to the Corps last week. So they will be packaging, that was at the local level, they will be packaging it and sending it on to DC. We have had a hearing on the Senate Bill 622, which is the $10 million loan or grant money that would come from the Oregon Lottery to help drainage districts and levee systems across the state. And then we also, that went well. We want to thank Shirley Craddock and others for participating in that effort. We also met last week with Speaker Kotek at the end of the week regarding the additional dollars we want to get for the new district. And we were kind of under the radar for a $2 million ask for the new district. That conversation included Michael Jordan, Evan Mitchell, Mark Landauer, our lobbyist, and myself. I think the meeting went very well, and direction to do some outreach to our legislators that are touching our districts. So we will keep you informed of that process moving forward. But it was positive. We didn't hear no. That's always a positive thing. In addition, we are planning to meet with Chris Cummins, who's the director of Oregon Business, on Wednesday to talk about, we had the $500,000 grant for the new district, and it has to be spent by the end of June of this year. And we're hoping we're going to have a discussion on, can we carry some of that over to, if we don't get it all spent, which I don't anticipate us being able to accomplish. And so other information from the new district that you all wanted to keep informed of, there was an introduction of a new member. The city of Fairview is having Eric Moeller as their representative, and he's replacing Mike Weatherby. That also resulted in, that was decided by city council. That also impacted our electing of a new vice chair because Mike Weatherby was the vice chair. The new vice chair is Steve Fancher, City of Gresham Public Works Director. Great addition. We began some initial discussion of a budget amendment that takes some of the money that the 123,000 that the LRC partnership contributed, granted to the new district. So we have to go through a formal budget amendment because we are now subject to public budget law. So that got started. And the other thing is our very brilliant Casey did some introduction of our financial policies per public budget law to cover long-term financing, annual budget, those sort of things. We're getting those in place. So they will be in place when they adopt their budget this year. This was just an introduction. We'll be actually going through a process adoption in the next couple months. And just this upcoming meeting will be focused on finalizing the budget amendment and updating. And actually we have a mission vision value consultant who will be attending that meeting to kickstart that committee and get that started. And we are in the final stage of selecting a consultant for the revenue model. And so we are rocking and rolling. Any questions?
Yes, is the flood safety district considering calling itself the flood safety district?
They have not gotten there yet, but I will tell you, they will be considering. We will going through that process because we know it can't be that forever. We will not get anybody on board with them. We'll lose them before we get the first 3 words out. So thank you. We have carried that forward to them.
Thank you.
That's my summary.
Any other new business?
I think we have.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, so since I sent out the agenda, Hong asked me to add an executive session to the end of the meeting. And so we do have about 15 more minutes more of content if we can get people to stick around.
I can.
I can.
Okay.
I can.
Good, great, that's quorum. Then I am going to go ahead and well, I can, Hong, can I just read it onto the record for the citation?
Yes, and
Well,
we'll
I
have
think
to
we probably
ask
do.
public members.
Do we have to officially say we're going into executive session now? Put it on the minute?
Yes, yeah.
Is that adequate?
I'll just go ahead and put into the recording. It's the purpose is to discuss confidential legal advice and attorney-client communication that's not related to litigation, and so that's under ORS 40.255, ORS 192.355.9A, and ORS 192.660.2F. And I'll just go ahead and stop the recording now. Get the recording back up, and then you can just adjourn.
Okay, we hereby end the executive session. Go ahead and start the recording, Emily.
Got it.
All right, the meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you very much, Val.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Take care of those ribs, Mary Helen.
Well, I'm not going to have many left if I keep doing this, but I fell in October and hurt the right side. This time it's the left side. So